Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So we're back on to the Gaza conflict. Before I say that, there was another My Pursuit of Truth that was removed. Just an update. The one that I talked about a few podcasts, videos, whatever you want to call these things, ago was put back on. Can't remember what was it, 368. Now was it 390? It was another COVID one. They took off, said medical misinformation. I waited a few days. I listened to the whole thing. I didn't find anything in there. I told them that there's nothing, no medical misinformation there. I put bits from mainstream media in there to give the mainstream view, and I was questioning statistics mostly, and that kind of thing, and mentioning my freedom of speech in Article 10, and that one very quickly came back and was put back on. So I don't know what they're going through all my COVID-19 videos. Maybe I've been flagged by someone who doesn't like me, so they're going through them all now. I don't know. So I wait for the next one, I guess. So on this one is to do with, actually I did watch a program, did I? That was very disturbing. It was called Life and Death in Gaza. If you haven't seen it, it's on BBC. It's basically different people who, with their cameras, filmed, the first year of the Gaza conflict. And it made me think about how different we are now as a generation, how we differentiate people between like states, or people between terrorists and etc. And I don't know, because obviously my mind flashed back to how would this have been if it was the Second World War? Imagine in the Second World War, and this isn't a hate crime, I'm talking about historically, in the Second World War, if you were in the 1940s, your view, not mine, but people of the 1940s view of Germany, or would have been Italy and Japan, would probably have been negative, and you wouldn't be differentiating between the people. You'd be seeing the whole, you've seen of all the posters, the propaganda, Pathé News and all that stuff, the language that was used about Germans specifically. But now we can, I wonder, if now we were to have the Second World War, we would be, and I guess it's good in a way, but it probably makes it difficult for governments fighting wars, because now you would have to differentiate between the German people, and you would say, well, these are the German people. They don't want Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party and the SS, although I suppose a lot of them did. But we're all products of the places that we're in. Remember that. And there would be a differentiation. Like now, when we look at, say, in Palestine, you have Hamas, a terrorist organization, and of course, you're saying, well, this is different because this was Germany. But wait a minute, in today's time, I suspect the Nazi Party, which was the ruling party of the government, same as Hamas is the ruling party in Palestine. Not trying to equate things, but what I'm trying to say is that if we looked at times now, I suspect that the Western powers would have said that the Nazi Party is a terrorist organization, and therefore would have it would have been seen differently than, say, Germany or Deutschland, and therefore we would be looking at it through those eyes. It just made me think about how we've changed in time, how we can now differentiate. We can just see the warring factors, and then see the innocent people that are getting caught up in this just because they happen to live there, or because they've been born there, they have an allegiance to that place, whether they like it or not. It just made me think about this, and seeing this program with these people and the devastation that they're going through. And obviously you don't know, it could be a Hamas sympathizer, it could be someone who works for Hamas filming these images. This is the problem with this kind of, I suppose not guerrilla warfare, but akin to it. You don't know who the enemy is because they're not wearing a uniform. It's a mindset. And maybe that's always been the case. You know, like you could look at in the Nazi Party, it was a mindset. But of course, in those days, they would wear uniforms and you'd know who was the enemy and who wasn't. Although, you know, I guess sympathisers, you'd never know those because they wear normal clothes. They're just the normal people. But just to see the suffering that they're going through, it's horrendous that it's still happening in this day and age. And now Israel, or I should say the government of Israel, because I should use the same thing, isn't it? It's not Israel, it's not the people of Israel, it's one particular government at this time of Israel who are now saying that UNRWA is not allowed to, they've passed a law. I don't know how they've passed a law in Palestine. I believe they recognise them as a terrorist state. So the United Nations Relief Organisation, I can't remember what the UNRWA actually stands for, but it's something like that. But it's mostly made up Palestinians. And I know there has been, and I think I've covered it even on The Pursuit of Truth, there has been allegations of them being, people who work for them being involved with Hamas, or that, you know, Israel's claims been infiltrated. I don't know how much that's true because it's easy to say it, but without giving any evidence, how do you know whether it's true or not? But I don't know how Israel could pass a law on another person's country. But they're fine to say in Israel, UNRWA are not allowed to, you know, they're a terrorist state, so they shouldn't be allowed in Israel. But are Israel allowed to say that in Palestine? I suppose it's because Palestine isn't actually, I don't know if it is a legitimized state because not every country recognizes it. So is that why they can say in Palestine, UNRWA can't be there and they have to go based on a law? How is that law passed in a country that they're currently occupying? I don't know what the vernacular would be. So this is what the Pursuit of Truth is about. What's your view on this? Let's hear from the mainstream media. This is the what I'm talking about.
Let's go to northern Gaza now, where Sky News has witnessed scenes of devastation inside a hospital where the Israeli military says it captured around 100 Hamas militants. Well, the Palestinian Civil Defense says 1,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's campaign in northern Gaza in the last 3 weeks alone. Health officials say 43,000 people have been killed since last October. In the northern towns of Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun and the Jabalia refugee camp, emergency services warned 100,000 people are stranded without food and medical access. Well, as part of its operation in the north, Israeli troops raided the Kamal Adwan hospital and captured around 100 people they say are Hamas militants. Medical staff deny that. A warning that this report from our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle contains images of some killed in the fighting.
When aid agencies warn that Gaza's hospitals are barely functioning, this is what they mean. The wounded lie on thin mattresses wherever there is space. The empty stares and emotionless eyes tell stories where words have failed. There is the occasional cry or groan of pain, but mostly people are silent, dazed, numb to this catastrophic war. Israeli forces entered this hospital last week. They arrested around 100 people, including many of the medical staff. They are accused of being terrorists. The IDF released this video of weapons they claim to have found there. Now, only a few doctors remain to care for hundreds of patients, and in these conditions.
Blood on the floor.
Surgical gloves, pools of iodine and medicine packets lie scattered on the surgery floors. Soiled gowns and blankets are piled in heaps on the edges of the corridors. The storeroom has been left ransacked. Everything we ever built, they burnt to the ground, this doctor tells us. They set our hearts on fire. They killed my son. Outside, the never-ending buzz of Israeli drones continues in the skies overhead. And a few people wander through the besieged wasteland. What hasn't been buried under the rubble has fled elsewhere. Israel has ordered everyone to leave here. Many have, but the cost of staying, the price of defiance, is laid out here, strapped onto a wooden cart and ready for burial. Life in northern Gaza is gradually being silenced. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
And in the past hour, Israel's parliament has passed legislation banning the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees and designating it a terror organization. Well, our security and defense editor, Deborah Haynes, joins me now from Tel Aviv. Deborah, Israel has been clear about its distrust of UNRWA and its workers. We've also just seen the devastation in Gaza itself. What will this mean for getting vital aid into Gaza?
Yeah, it's no surprise that these two bills were passed today by the Israeli parliament. As you said, there are two of them. The first one, it effectively bans UNRWA from operating on Israeli soil, and that will take effect in 3 months. The second bill effectively designates UNRWA a terrorist organisation, making it very difficult for the government to work with it. And it really does mark a new low in what is already a very problematic, a very difficult, strained relationship between Israel and the United Nations. Like you say, Israel has repeatedly accused UNRWA of having links to Hamas, of supporting Hamas. UNRWA is the most important agency, though, providing aid to Palestinians. There is huge concern about the impact this could have on an organisation that is already having to work in the most difficult conditions imaginable. And for Israel's allies too, there has already been voices of concern about these bills, in particular the United States, which has said that if these bills pass, it could actually then mean that the situation violates US laws, which would then put into question the kind of support that it is able to give to Israel. So this is a very significant moment.
Deborah Haynes with the latest there from Tel Aviv. Deborah, thank you.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess there's two ways of looking at this. You could look at this from the view of that, what if this organisation is got links to Hamas, if they have evidence of that, but they haven't produced any of this evidence. But the problem is because the function of UNRWA is to facilitate aid. But I suppose they may, if they are finding that this aid is being given to Hamas terrorists, well, I suppose you could track them and then you'd be able to find where they are and where the hostages are, where the food is going, you know, with all the drones and stuff. But that doesn't seem to be happening that I'm aware of. So you could look at it that point of view, that it's, or you could look at it the view that how, and, you know, the word that one fears to use of these types of conflicts, and I can't think of a conflict that I've seen in my lifetime that fits that word, that has legal connotations, so that's why I'm not going to say it, but I think we all know which word I'm thinking of. And I'm insinuating this, but I'm worried because people may look at this and say this is, you know, like with the turning off of the water, the electricity, the way that everyone knew that beginning of when they turned off all those things, that this was different than like even how Russia's doing its conflict in Ukraine, although I believe it did do a little bit of this at the beginning, and there was great outcry about this, about being against international law, whereas this is, well, there has been outcry about being against international law, but I guess the same with Russia, that it hasn't made a blind bit difference. People say things, but nothing's really changed. But the worry is that now you're taken away. When America already said, I don't know how many days ago now, that Israel has 30 days to increase aid, and now they're going to say that UNRWA is a terrorist organization in Israel and it can't operate in Israel. And so that would mean that obviously if they are in Palestine, they wouldn't be able to, facilitate the aid because they can't work with the terrorist organization, and therefore those trucks won't be allowed to go to them, or their trucks won't be allowed to go through. And if they are the ones that are bringing the majority of the very scarce food that's already going in, what is then happening to those people inside, which are not allowed to be treated as collective punishment? What is happening to those people who are starving for a year? I mean, they talked about starvation and those types of things months ago. What state now? How many people have died because they didn't get food that weren't that could be considered, not part of a terrorist organization? Innocent people, the children, at least, where you can you can easily say that they're children. They haven't formed these views of terrorism yet, and therefore, how many of them have died because they didn't get food or water or medicine? I don't know. So here's the next one.
The Prime Minister has called on Israel to reverse its decision to ban the main UN aid agency operating in Gaza. Other charities say they won't be able to replicate the work of UNRWA, which has been designated a terrorist organisation by Israel. Well, let's get some reaction now. We can speak to Martin Griffiths, who's the former UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. And he joins me now, as you can see. A very good evening to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. First of all, what is your reaction to the Israeli ban on UNRWA?
Well, it's predicted and predictable. It's not surprising. It's still an incredible shock because it's a complete act of effrontery, not only against the law, international law, humanitarian law, the law of atrocities and crimes. It's also a blatant disregard for the obligations of every member state, not just Israel, every one of them who signed up and were subject to the General Assembly decision to create UNRWA 75 years ago. So it's a terrible shock, and the consequences are legion.
I'll come on to the consequences in just a moment and what you think they are, but just to say that Israel would say the reason for this ban is that Hamas has infiltrated UNRWA.
Yes, that's true, and they claimed that very early on after October 7th. The events of that day remain a horrific memory for all of us, including me. And Israel claimed that quite a few staff from UNRWA were involved in those terrible acts of October the 7th. No evidence was provided. The UN did an internal oversight inquiry. It found no evidence that could go to court to convict people. And then the French foreign minister, the former foreign minister, Catherine Colonna, did a report which investigated the claims that UNRWA was not balanced and neutral in its activities, including in its curricula for children in Palestine. And it found it largely very, very conscious of these issues. So it's all right to allege, it's all right to claim. It's quite a different matter to provide the evidence necessary to take those people to court, and they haven't been.
Israel also suggests that there are other agencies that can pick up the work of UNRWA. They've also implied that perhaps Israel could get more involved itself. What do you make of that? Is that possible?
No, it's not. I was in that job, head of the humanitarian community in the UN and elsewhere for the last 3 years. And we looked a lot at this issue of whether other agencies could help out UNRWA in its time of need and in its time of appalling defunding, including by the UK and US and other governments. And we concluded very, very carefully over those many months a number of things. Number one, no organization could, no organization had the mandate, and perhaps most importantly, no organization had the capacity to be the companion and witness and friend of the Palestinian people. UNRWA has 30,000 staff, a great majority Palestinian. They have done this for 75 years. They know the community inside out. That can't be just handed on to some other agency. And indeed, in the United Nations, at least, we would not agree to this idea of just passing a mandate across to somebody else because of the illegal acts of one member state.
So what then do you think the effects will be on the ground?
Well, first of all, there's a terrible effect, of course, on humanitarian delivery. God knows in Gaza these days, there's barely enough of that anyway. But UNRWA is, as many people have said, the linchpin, the backbone. Words are all the same for the aid delivery in Gaza, and now in Lebanon, and now in the West Bank and elsewhere, number one. Number two, Gaza is the source of hope for the people of Palestine. Its mandate includes looking at the prospects of freedom and peace for those people, including the right to return, including a two-state solution. UNRWA was formed for that very act. And I know from many years of 50 years in dealing with conflicts, that if you scrap hope, which would happen under these circumstances, people die. People give up the will to live. Families die. Diseases grow. So there's the second thing. And the third thing is extraordinary precedent this creates. Why not look to another country in the world? We should all be observing this very carefully and think, well, we get rid of another UN agency. Our national legislation would make them a terrorist group. They're a bit of a problem. You get rid of them. UN agencies, NGOs, and so forth. This is unprecedented. Philip Lazzarini has said as much, and he's entirely and sadly right.
Sir Keir Starmer has said he's gravely concerned. What would you like the UK government to do now?
I'd like to move beyond statements of concern, which are a good start, obviously, and very welcome, to statements of action. And it's very interesting that the Norwegian Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, has, of course, as you know, said that they will approach the International Court of Justice to see how this fits with that court's decision on the illegal occupation by Israel of the Palestinian territories. That's action. That goes beyond concern. We also know that the decisions of the International Court of Justice, the comments made throughout these many months by UN leadership, including the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights and UNRWA's chief, that people and governments need to look at the way in which their acts and aid and relations are not breaching international judgments about the illegality of Israeli occupation. So let's look at action. And I would hope and believe, indeed, that the UK could be extremely active on this point, joining the growing voice in Europe and elsewhere.
Well, Martin Griffiths, we really appreciate your time this evening and sharing your views on this issue with us. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Of course, they won't be able to do anything because they're going to want to side with America, and all it's ever going to be is words. Because that's what, I mean, he's been talking about the UNRWA's been set up for 75 years. What has it achieved in that time? Has it achieved a two-state solution? Two sets of people can't live side by side with each other in 75 years of trying. That doesn't mean that you should give it up, but it just means that I suspect the will, the heart, the energy, all those things that would make it happen are not really there. Because there are other places where, like say with South Africa, they're after apartheid, they have come together and people are living together. I'm sure there's still racism and all sorts of other things that are going on, as that happens everywhere. Unfortunately, with human beings, it still seems that we're not getting rid of that mentality. But still, they've managed to pass apartheid and live together peacefully and coexist and create a beacon for the rest of us to look at. And Ireland as well. Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, whatever the names, sorry if I'm getting them wrong, the peace that's come there since the Troubles. And I'm sure there's lots of other places where this has happened. So it's not impossible. if you really want it. And why wouldn't we want everyone to live together peacefully? Why would we want this destruction, whether it's Hamas, killing innocent or any Israelis, or whether it's Israelis killing Palestinians, or, this destruction, hospitals, mosques. Like when I was watching this Life and Death, there was no place that was safe. Imagine, if it was you with your family and you're not part of this and you just want to live, and you, like me, say that I want to, if I've been born with this mind in a different place, which of course you never know because we're all products of the place that we find ourselves in and the time to a degree. It's difficult to get past that because we're all trained by that through the schooling system of the place where you're at and the TV and etc. But, imagine I've got my family and I just want to, I don't have a problem with anyone and I want to live with everyone. And yet where would I go to be safe? I'm caught up in this. Go to a school, go to a mosque. Where would be the safe place? Where every place gets hit. Maybe rightly because there are terrorists that are using these things as well. But I don't know. Where do I find a safe place? How do I keep myself out of being targeted? Because I don't know what's going on either. I don't like it either. And now, look at it from human history type of view, from God looking down, 40,000 plus dead. For what? Squabbling, irrespective of justice and all that and the system, squabbling over land and control of that, that no one can take with them. That we should be thinking that this is our one existence. You look at the beauty that we've all been given, the beauty of life, the beauty of everything around us. We're not living on some barren planet that doesn't have all these things. We have everything. There's no need for all this disaster and starvation, all these things that we know how to get rid of if we work together. I say it every time and I always come back to it. I don't know when others will, when those in charge, the leaders of the world, the ones that have been given this great responsibility by all of us to will come up with the same mindset of, wait a minute, let's forget about all these trinkets, all these crowns, all these sovereignties and etc. Not in a bad way, but let's all work together. Let's see, oh yeah, you're just like me, I'm just like you. We both have one existence, we both have hearts, we both have feelings, we both have dreams, we both want our people to live in the best way possible. Let's make this happen. I know it sounds so crazy and utopian and like kumbaya, and that's probably the charge that I'll get. But really, do we want the one that we're living in now? Take care, take it easy, God bless and peace.